I hadn't been there very long. I hadn't been there a few months, and I was cutting ayahuasca in the jungle one time cutting the vine to go and make ayahuasca. And I got bitten by a sandfly, and the sandfly carries a disease called leishmaniasis, or leishmaniosa in Portuguese, which is a lovely word. And it's a nasty disease, though. It's a flesh-eating parasite, and it started eating into my chest. And people around me said, "Oh, that's trouble. That is. You need to start taking injections of antimonium tartrate, which is a heavy metal." And I'm not a big heavy metal fan. It takes a little while to be able to distinguish visions with information from your own kind of stuff bubbling up from your own projections. There's a bit of a science to that. So anyway, I felt confident that I would go down that route, and so I did. And I lost 10 kilos. I lost a wife. I lost a pair of rose-tinted spectacles, and emerged into a real different way of being. And part of that was a love for the forest, a love for the curative powers of the forest, and a real desire to do something to preserve and regenerate it. And that, a couple of years down the line, emerged into rain. Like myrrh, for example, is called nataf in Hebrew, which means prophecy, and it also means distilled. It also means drip. Which is quite interesting because it drips. In terms of its pharmacology, it's complicated. It's got dehydroabiatic acid in it, which is as a GABA receptor agonist. It works on the same system as Valium, although it works, it's a whole lot more fun than Valium. And the GABA receptor is the most common receptor in your brain. About 40% of your neurons have GABA receptors on them, and it's an inhibitory system, the GABA system. So what that basically means is it calms the brain down.
Hello and welcome to the Christmas special edition of the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. For episode number 79, it is my great pleasure to welcome the author, visionary CEO, and shaman, although he completely denies he's a shaman, and someone I'm very proud to call a friend, the Reverend Danny Nemu. Danny's background is in the history and philosophy of medicine from the University of Manchester. He first encountered ayahuasca when living in Japan. After 6 years drinking there with a Santo Daime group, he followed the trail back to its source in the Brazilian Amazon, where he was bitten by a sandfly, leading to a leishmaniasis infection. This highly aggressive bacterial parasite quickly colonized a few inches of his skin, with designs on much more, and proved to be a great teacher, providing ample opportunity to study firsthand the intricacies and potencies of ayahuasca as used as a medicine within the Daime worldview. The process took 8 months, involving diets and barks, many rituals, and daily consumption of the visionary brew. By the end of it, he had lost 10 kilos and gained a deep respect for the complexity and intelligence of the natural world. Now, he's released 2 of his 3 books on the apocalypse, and is 2 drafts into the 3rd. The first book, Science Revealed, The Apocalypse in Science, Discovery, covers the biographies of scientists including Tesla and Einstein, and reveals how our most groundbreaking ideas result not from rational thinking and tapping on calculators, but from visions, dreams, feverish delirium, and other non-rational revelation. The second, Neuro-Apocalypse, is about veils arising in the course of cognition and the revelations that cut them down. And to that end, we discuss the presence of visionary drug use in the Bible, most notably frankincense and myrrh. And we talk about the 3 kings, that is the Christmas special after all, and what were the 3 kings actually bringing, and going into frankincense and myrrh in some depth. Now, Danny is also the founder, CEO of a reforestation and agroforestry charity called RAIN. Now, RAIN focuses on the resources and intelligence of a distributed global network via local nodes into vitally important projects that regenerate degraded land. And it's a really special charity. And we talk about how the charity got set up at the start of the show. And I really encourage you to listen. We'll come back to that in a sec, but I really encourage you to find out more about RAIN, because they're a truly special organization. Now, in the Plus show, we discuss the apocalyptic waves and novelty that we're currently experiencing, and Danny traces their route back through kind of relatively modern history, back to the kind of late medieval period, and talks about these in way format. I rabbit on about food crisis as I'm prone to do, but you all know the drill. So it's a riveting conversation, and what Danny also discusses, which I think is really, really interesting, is what shamanism is and what shamanism isn't. Now, Danny is uniquely placed in terms of giving his opinion on shamanism, so I think that's something that you will definitely enjoy if you're a Plus Show member on the Patreon. Now, this is normally the section where I ask listeners to consider supporting the show if they don't already. And I'd like to propose something different this episode and ask you to consider a donation to RAIN instead. As I said, RAIN is an amazing charity that does tremendous work, and it's one that I'm proud to personally support. But it's a small charity and it needs help. So I'm asking you all to really consider where if you're going to do something charitable this Christmas, this holiday season, that maybe you'll consider RAIN in there. I certainly will be, and I hope you will too. So once again, the link to donate to RAIN is in the show notes, along with the link to Danny's books and articles, as well as a number of great podcast interviews on other shows. Now, as is tradition, a big thank you to Ankh Patron members. So thank you Michelle, Merrily, Marco, Jen, Hannah, Flora, Eric, Desiree, Austin, Ali, Carrie S, Brennan, Tyler, Madeline, Jorge, Tony, Savannah, Icaro, William O, Roland B, Steph, Tim, Tao, Wei, and Pamela. Thank each and every one of you for your support. It means the world to me, it really does. Now, before we start, I'd like to tell you a short anecdote about the interesting circumstances around how Danny and I met. My friend Michelle DeVezis had given me an incredible tarot reading as part of a project, kind of a long-term project she's doing. And to cut a long story short, one of the cards pulls reference to shaman, and another told me I needed to find healing spring waters nearby me. Now, literally a day later, Danny got in touch after realizing our proximity and popped by, and just happened to be drinking a bottle of healing water from a local spring that he'd rediscovered. So there you have it. Literally the next day, a shaman who says he's not a shaman turns up at my door with a bottle of healing water from a spring that he's rediscovered. That's how the magic works, kids. It's all real. Right, let's get into it.
Danny, you're hugely welcome. It's so nice to have you here on the show, and this has been a while in the making. We've been trying to get this arranged for a while, but it's been super busy time. Everything kind of been up in the air and juggling various different bits and bobs. But it is very, very nice to have you on the show, and to get everything moving, to get everybody on the same page. Can you give a little bit of an intro into the wonderful charity that you've created and are CEO of, the fantastic RAIN?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I was living in Brazil about, let me think now, 13, 14 years ago. I was living in the Amazon, and I think we might get on to why I was living in the Amazon. I was very curious about ayahuasca, and I ended up living on an ayahuasca center. And during that time, I met a woman. I was very ill and had a parasite, which I treated with ayahuasca. And during that time, I met a woman who nursed me back to health. And then off we went to Bolivia. And by the time we were in Cusco, I think, in Peru, she was pregnant. And so I then, I think we'd known each other for about 2-3 months at that point.
Right.
And then I went to present myself to her parents in another part of Brazil, in Minas Gerais. And her family welcomed me, and her brothers took me swimming in a stream. And it was beautiful. There were dragonflies buzzing around and fish nibbling at my flesh. I don't think they'd ever seen such pale skin in their waters. People used to wince at my belly in Brazil. But so it was lovely. And then we moved back to England. And some years later, I think about 4 or 5 years later, we went back to Brazil to show off the children. And I wanted to go back to the stream, but the stream had dried up. And all the streams are drying up in that region. There used to be, I think, 5 rivers. Now there's 1. it's kind of the water levels going down by the year. You can literally see it. And the reason for this is deforestation. That part of the world has suffered from massive deforestation, and the result is, for a bunch of reasons, that causes floods and drought. So the dry season's getting longer and the rivers drying up. And the local town is called Cachoeira. Cachoeira means waterfall, and the waterfall itself had dried up in the 1920s. But the people of that town had or at least the mayor of that town had a dream to see the water of the waterfall flowing again. And he was also the bus driver of the first project we did as RAIN. RAIN is the Regenerative Agroforestry Impact Network. Although we weren't called RAIN at that point, we were called Tarumim. Tarumim is the name of an entity from the Amazon who you call upon when you want it to rain. But you can't call her twice or three times, because then you'll get a torrential downpour. And there's stories of the rain falling so hard that the roof came off. So we changed that name after a while. But anyway, the first thing that we did was I organised basically a bus journey of local farmers to go to an agroforestry centre, and the driver of the bus was the mayor of the next door town, Cachoeira, and he asked us, basically, he said, we've got a school and we had a project to build a sapling nursery, but we ran out of money. Can you help us out? And I said, I'll see what I can do. So he raised some money for that, and then raised some money for another sapling nursery at the next door town local school. And then we started reforesting the springs in the area, because around Cachoeira there are 5 springs and all of them have dried up. And it was pretty interesting because imagine kind of Brazilian farmers. It's quite a conservative crew, really, and people had tried to get onto their land to reforest their springs in the past, but it wasn't really working. So when we started working with the school, we found that the school kids were going to their parents and talking about the trees, and also talking about hydrology, because the people there were teaching them about hydrology. And so the parents were remembering that they used to swim in these rivers when they were little, and their children were telling them they wanted to swim in the rivers again. So all of the landowners who had springs basically allowed us onto the land, and we started restoring the springs there with the reforestation. And then it kind of exploded from there. We had a connection in Recife, which is a big urban capital in the always get these two mixed up, the northeast of the country, and east. And so we did another sapling nursery there, which was really cool. It was a geodesic dome, looks wicked. And then started working with Black women's groups in the favela, producing educational materials. Actually, it was a collaboration between the University of Pernambuco, master's student there. She went into the favela, the slums of Brazil, and was working with a women's group there. First made a demonstration center with things like how to collect water off your roof with plastic bottles, and all kinds of things about agroecology that you can do in your house and growing your own food, and how to do that in slum conditions. And also made a big booklet, which is beautifully illustrated. You can see all this on a website, by the way, which is rainumbrella.co.uk. No, that's not true. It's rainumbrella.org. And I should know that. And so that kind of exploded as well. That's gone into 9 favelas now. It's just been nearly finished translated into English for a Ugandan refugee camp, because they asked for it as well. And now we're trying to translate it into Arabic for the occupied territories, the Palestinian occupied territories as well. So that all happened. And then we got involved with a couple of, actually 3 indigenous nations as well. So none of this was actually directly connected with ayahuasca. I think a lot of, I think it's quite important, maybe we'll get onto this later, but to bring your experiences out of that world into other worlds. So none of it was really connected to ayahuasca at that point, but then we got involved with a particular indigenous nation, the Nokikoi, who have an ayahuasca tradition. And so I guess half of the work is doing regeneration in Brazil, and it's all community led. It's people who've come to us. We don't really have anything in terms of theory to offer Brazilians. They know what they're doing. They know what the threats are. They know how to deal with them. There's plenty of knowledge there, but they're missing out on resources. They're missing out on money. And a little bit of money goes a very, very long way in South America. So that's kind of half of the work. And then the other half of the work is doing media and advocacy, and basically getting people excited about reforestation, about mutual aid networks. How can we over here help indigenous nations over there without going through giant NGOs or without going through inefficient governments or all those kind of things. And that's something that people really don't want to do these days. So the vision of it is a distributed mutual aid network based on the model of the mycorrhizal root network, which is how trees communicate underground through fungal networks. So that's kind of what we do. We work underground. We don't, in the same way that the mycorrhizal root network doesn't tell trees how to grow. It might influence them a little bit, but it provides means for trees to communicate with each other and trade resources, and also essentially trade media, because trees communicate information as well. If one tree is attacked by an insect, it will produce defense chemicals, but it'll also produce what's called infochemicals, which tell other trees that there's an insect in the area that might eat them. And then the other trees start producing defense chemicals as well, including trees of other species. So that's kind of our media policy as well. The question is, how do we produce media which firstly travels very well? And I'm telling you, as you well know, pictures of fires in the Amazon, A, we've already seen them. B, that you don't really want to share them on social media. You don't want to send them to your mum, do you, at Christmas? And also, scary pictures kind of freeze up our minds. Scary pictures induce cortisol, basically, and cortisol makes you do repeated actions, and you go back and do what you did before. And what we've been doing for all this time doesn't really help. Whereas dopamine, which is stimulated by beauty, dopamine is much more conducive to forming new pathways, developing new ways of working. And so that's the media policy. Is so we produce media which A, travels well, and B, produces produces a response which is commensurate with the level of threat that we're facing. So it's called RAIN. It's the Regenerative Agroforestry Impact Network. And yeah, that's the kind of origin stories. And it's gone out into, now we've got Trees of Music as well, which you can have a look at.
Yeah, which is awesome. It's really cool. So as this is our pre-Christmas episode, I think this is a beautiful, beautiful cause, and I'm a huge supporter of Danny's work, and a big believer in RAIN. And so I will ask everybody there who's a listener to the Spirit Box, if this is something that you care about. You hear me talk about nature endlessly, so you can imagine that this is something that deeply resonates with me, and it does. And Danny's work in RAIN is exactly the type of project I think is needed and necessary, and the type of direction we need to go for the reasons that Danny's already very articulately put forward. I would encourage you to support RAIN this Christmas. Give the gift of RAIN. And sorry, I know the marketing spiel, it never leaves me, the marketing spiel, but we'll get the right link in the show notes for anybody who would like to support RAIN, and I genuinely encourage you to do so.
That sounds really good, Dara. Thank you very much. We have many projects under the umbrella of RAIN, and the one that we're really pushing for Christmas is the Trees of Music project. There's a tree called the Pernambuco tree, and it's massively endangered. The last survey in a really formerly very dense region of the Atlantic forest found something like less than 1,500 of these trees standing, and they're called Brazil. They're called Pernambuco tree and also Brazil wood. It's the tree that Brazil was named after, and it's bright red. It produces a bright red dye. In fact, that's where the name comes from. Brasa in Portuguese means a glowing coal, and so Brazil means is related to that red, beautiful red color. And it was traded between the Portuguese and the Spanish, and it was the first resource that was extracted. In the same way that the Ivory Coast was named after ivory, Brazil was named after Brazil wood. And this tree in the mid 1700s, it was basically discovered that it was uniquely resonant, uniquely flexible, and very strong. So a great bow maker realized that you could make a concave bow. Like an archer's bow is convex, and that violin bow is concave, and you can only really do that with this one particular species. So it's been exploited for making violin bows for all this time. And as the Atlantic forest has shrunk, and as these trees have been chopped down, we're really, really running low on it. And there's plenty of people learning the violin. The trade in violin bows isn't going anywhere. And so there's a kind of cultural aspect to this. We're looking to save the future of music as well as the as well as the forest.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Treesofmusic.org, that one.
Great stuff. And again, we'll put that in the show notes. Right. So you mentioned ayahuasca in the opening elements of the show there. Is that something that you want to take us further in?
Yeah, okay. At first, I lived in Japan before I lived in Brazil. I lived in Japan for six years. I think I went there when I was about 23 or so, and I'm 45 now, so we're talking about 22 years ago.
I remember seeing on your Twitter, sorry to interrupt you, that you shared a shonen knife video before we actually got chatting, and how shonen knife was for those of you was of a certain age and a certain musical taste will know who shonen knife were, but they're a wonderful punk band, and just how your love of shonen knife was one of the drivers to go to Japan. And I so related to that. I was like, I totally get why you did that. They were brilliant.
Shonen knife, man. Yeah, actually, they're still going now. I saw them just before I left Japan. One of the last gig I went to. Oh, they're brilliant. Yeah, I mean they're older than me now, still knocking out the tunes. They're really good. So that was one influence. Watching The Word when I was
I saw them on The Word as well.
So that changed my life. Thank you, Terry Christian. And then what happened? And the other thing that took me to Japan was to go and study TEFL, to be a TEFL teacher, and I was in a guest house in Barcelona to do this. And everyone on my course was really loud. Actually, quite loud Americans. I don't mean to generalize, but there's no romantic interest at all, but just her way, and that kind of piqued my interest about Japan. And then I was walking across the road at my university in Manchester, and I bumped into a friend literally in the middle of the street and in the middle of the road. And I said, "Hey, Ben, where are you going?" And he said, "I'm just going to go and get a document from this particular office that says I'm doing a degree, and I need to get it now because I want to apply for this job in Japan, and this is the last day that the office is open." It was only open for another 2 hours, and it was a Friday. So I said, "Well, I'll go along with you." And I ended up going to get this document, applying to go to Japan on this program. And so that chance meeting led to 6 years in Japan, which was fascinating. And we could talk about that for hours. But one of the things that I encountered there was a Brazilian crew of ayahuasqueros from the Daime tradition, and there's some very beautiful musical traditions. Came back to England for a bit, but I was very curious about going to Brazil to learn about the roots of the culture. And also I was writing a book called at that point, well, eventually became a trilogy, but I was writing a book about the history of medicine, and what else was it about a whole bunch of stuff, influence of revelation on the history of science, and kind of rationalism generally, but part of that and also how psychedelics affect the mind, and all kinds of neurology and linguistics, and it gets pretty wacky in the second book, which is this funky diagram behind me that's called Neuro-Apocalypse. But anyway, so I was very curious about to see another medical tradition and magical tradition close up. So I went off to Brazil, and went to go and live in the Amazon. And then I got I hadn't been there very long. I hadn't been there a few months, and I was cutting ayahuasca in the jungle one time cutting the vine to go and make ayahuasca. And I got bitten by a sandfly, and the sandfly carries a disease called leishmaniasis, or leishmaniosa in Portuguese, which is a lovely word. And it's a nasty disease, though. It's a flesh-eating parasite, and it started eating into my chest. And people around me said, "Oh, that's trouble. That is, you need to start taking injections of antimonium tartrate, which is a heavy metal." And I'm not a big heavy metal fan, and decided I didn't want anything to do with that. And also, my book was about among other things, the history of colonial medicine and the autonomy that we can get back by taking control over our sovereign bodies. And so I wasn't really up for taking those injections. And I'd gone there to learn about ayahuasca, and I'd gone there to learn about disease and cure. And I had a perfect opportunity. And I remember, people were freaking out because that part, it's already quite colonized where I was. It wasn't far into the jungle. And Brazil's the most medicalized country by far in the world. Is the highest rate of cesarean sections. For example, they throw pills down you like nobody's business, antibiotics, all of it. And so people thought I was crazy, and they thought I was gonna die because or get severely disfigured because it eats the flesh, and then it starts to attack the cartilage in the nose and the ears and all that kind of stuff. And I remember this guy saying, "I'll drive you around town. You can see all the guys with no noses left, and then you'll take your injections." And I didn't know what to do. I was quite panicked. This it was on my chest and it was growing. This protozoal infection. Apparently, it's a cousin of leprosy. And I drank a dose and had to think about what I was going to do. And in my visions, I saw a bunch of stuff. But one of the things I saw was a series of people who'd come to see me and hassle me to go and take injections. And I saw that their disease had gone away, but it manifested in another way. So one of them had kind of weird bumps on his legs, and one of them had bad articulation because antimonium tartrate attacks your joints. And one of them was just a kind of boneheaded idiot who clearly hadn't learned whatever he was meant to be learning from it. And then that vision went on into the various traditions that I'm interested in. And there's quite a few of them. I was a practicing Buddhist for a while, for example. And so in a lot of the traditions I was interested in, the Christian tradition, purgatory, the purge is a very important business. And in the alchemical tradition, you have the nigredo phase, and in the shamanic traditions, you have this idea of being torn apart and then remembered, the vision of being sliced into pieces. And so I knew what I was doing there in the country, and I was there to learn. And what a fantastic opportunity it was. So I decided not to take the injections. I drank a dose of ayahuasca every morning at 4 o'clock under the kind of tutelage of a curandero there. And it was absolutely formative. My life has not been the same ever since. I wouldn't recommend that you go and get leishmaniasis. And in fact, I wouldn't recommend that you take ayahuasca having got leishmaniasis either. This isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
And I also wouldn't recommend that you drink a dose of ayahuasca and then believe whatever comes out of it, because I'd been involved in the tradition for probably about 6-7 years at that point, and I was it takes a little while to be able to distinguish visions with information from your own kind of stuff bubbling up from your own projections. There's a bit of a science to that. So anyway, I felt confident that I would go down that route, and so I did. And I lost 10 kilos. I lost a wife. I lost a pair of rose-tinted spectacles, and emerged into a real different way of being. And part of that was a love for the forest, a love for the curative powers of the forest, and a real desire to do something to preserve and regenerate it. And that, a couple of years down the line, emerged into rain.
It is really a remarkable story, and listening to that story and doing as we all tend to do is put ourselves in that position of when you're faced with that really challenging decision, and how frightening that must have been. Where did you get the resolve from? Where did that come from for you to go, no, I'm putting my money where my mouth is?
Well, Crowley has a lot to say about this. In fact, he recommends risking your life regularly. In fact, and he did. He used to climb crazy mountains in blizzards. I'd already, I'd been involved in chaos magic from my early 20s, and right from the first sigil, it worked. And it was a surprise. I was just trying it. I was just bashing out a sigil, basically. Like, oh wow, that worked, and then another one worked, and very quickly I came to the conclusion that there's something in this. And so I'd gone all the way to Brazil and I'd had, so the book. I mean, to come back to the book, the book came after about a year after I started drinking ayahuasca. I was at a party, and someone passed me a bong, and I smoked the bong, and I then it was very antisocial. People were going, who's this strange foreigner at the party? Because I was went into, that thing coming up my spine. And anyway, I went home and I started writing. I started writing like a madman. Mm-hmm. And then I spent the next year, the kind of nocturnal, I don't know if I should call them downloads, whatever, but I just wrote a whole load of stuff. And that ended up being part of a book, but also a kind of a coherent system which I wanted to live my life by. And I'd written it, but it was very strange the way it was written, because it was really urgent. I wrote some of it at a wedding, for example. Rushed off to the toilet to write. I wrote it's actually not part of this book, but I wrote a Kabbalistic analysis of, what's that film, 2001, whilst having sex one time, because the idea kind of popped up and I was trying to get these notes down. Right. So this kind of urgency to write stuff, I've written stuff written notes on the window of dirty cars, for example. So I felt very much that something was pushing me towards doing that, and I found out some years later what it was, which is quite an interesting story as well. We'll get to that. But yeah, so when I went to Brazil, and I'd gone there with an intention, and the intention was learn about ayahuasca, learn about disease and cure, and I like to live my life. Let me put this another way. I believe that poetry and narrative forms are the let's say the mainframe of the universe, or the software on. I don't get the right metaphor, but the universe runs on poetry. I think that's how it works, basically, and certainly magic does.
Yeah.
I know, if you think about how a sentence works, or you think about how a poem works, it's got a certain meter, it's got a certain rhyme scheme, it's got a certain plot. So, if you say a line, I'll give an example. There was an old man on a roof who said, "I'm entirely aloof. I cannot explain, how's it go? Can't explain what to do with my brain, but I know I have absolute." It's got to be proof, really, or maybe truth, but it's going to be something that ends in oof. It's going to be one syllable. And in the same way, if you set up your spell, and spell obviously comes from the word spelling, the same way grimoire comes from the word grammar. If you arrange your symbols in a certain way, then, and it's poetic and it's beautiful and it's coherent and it's orderly, then I believe that the universe responds with order. Basically, it gives you back whatever you throw into the void in a coherent form. So I like to live my life through narrative and what makes sense poetically, and that's exactly it. I'd gone out there with put something in order. What I want to do, I want to go to Brazil, I want to learn about these two things. And I had the perfect opportunity. So having been given that opportunity, it would have been, I think, a terrible mistake not to have taken that opportunity. And I'm so glad that I did do that. And at the time, I was quite romantic as a young man. I genuinely, this is going to sound really cheesy, I would generally believe that I wanted to have a very strong, let's say, magical word. So if I decided I was going to do something, I'm going to do it. And this is one of the secrets of magic. Don't say anything you're not going to do, and if you're going to say something, then do it. And so that's what I did. I thought I'd rather have, and Crowley talks about this as well, but I'd rather have my word intact and be disfigured than have a weak word and have a proper shaped nose, but maybe the disease popping up in another way. And Jung talks about this. If you don't deal with the archetype internally, then it manifests externally. And I was kind of worried about what's going to happen next. If I don't deal with this now, what other trials am I going to be put through? So I thought, okay. And then again, from the Daime tradition, we've got lines like "Se eu correr apanha, se eu ficar apanha, se eu correr apanha mais," which means if I stay, I'm going to suffer, and if I run, I'm going to suffer more. So I was kind of coming from that, and I was totally immersed in the tradition. I've been going at it hard for 6 years, and I've been basing all kinds of decisions on my life because you go into a session and ideas will come to you, or things will come to you, and then all kinds of weird magic. I remember this one time I was doing a session, and I got a little kind of mediumistic tap on my head. I kind of put my mind to it, and I saw this thing, which was a very famous 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century magician, and I thought, what are you doing here? This is, it's a pretty Christian sect, really, Daime. Not really your gig, and who invited you? And I said, no, I don't do celebrity mediumship. Bugger off. And I didn't tell anyone about it. And someone comes up to me straight after the session and starts talking to me about Aleister Crowley. I thought, that's very strange. No one ever talked to me about Aleister Crowley in that context before. And then later on when I got a lift back from the session, the guy driving the car, he started talking to me about Crowley again. So I'd seen these acts of magic which were intriguing, enlightening, humorous, and always gave me lots of fruits. And then something came along. Their proper trial came along. It was almost like, are you in this or are you not? And I was. So was I going to chuck away my tradition, which meant so much to me, just because I was scared for my for my mortal coil? And to be fair, we're all going to die, and I would you're not saving yourself for anything other than a short period of time if you manage to keep alive for a bit longer. And it sounds very romantic and a little bit crazy, but I'm very
I like it. I like it a lot, and I admire it. Because people talk a lot. People talk about courage and present bravery, but it's generally presented through a barrier. It's presented from the castle walls. Anyone can talk shit from a castle wall, right? But to kind of get down to really get into the weeds, and risk it all is phenomenal, and I'm a real admirer of it, and like I from some of my own kind of adventures of I spent some time in a leprosy colony and in Varanasi, to shoot a story, and going off to that, and that was my commitment to what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be, and to tell a big story, with nothing along the lines of what you went through, but like I still that's really kind of where I wanted to ask you, what reservoir did you draw that from? And it feels like you were saying, well, I'm in this to win it. I'm committed to it, and that I'm a big admirer of that. Really, I think that's tremendous.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I like to be able to talk shit amongst the weeds as well as from.
We can do both.
Personal, I guess.
It's another terrible metaphor. It's like So.
What was it like in the leper colony?
It was an interesting place because it was actually set up by a bunch of ex-Agori sadhus, and who had the Agori originally set up to do this whole thing of like demonstrate that all paths lead to divinity, and including the deeply, deeply profane ones. So kind of basically every single one of their practices involves everything that is kind of deeply taboo within traditional kind of Hinduism. So they'd regularly partake in alcohol. They purposely use corpses for magical rituals. They meditate on dead bodies. A particular type of magical practice called Shava Sadhana, which is corpse magic. The cannibalism, consume human waste, all this kind of like deeply, deeply risque stuff. They were they're fairly out there. So I went to kind of shoot their work, and it took me in kind of a number of different directions. But one of the areas that I found is that this kind of there's a branch of from this sect, and these guys were like, well, actually, we've done that. Now we're actually going to help the people who are seen as the lowest in society, and we're going to help those who are going to treat those who have leprosy. They set up this fantastic institution that has helped dozens, or like dozens of thousands, who, in the wonderful Indian fashion, they were taking me through this their facility, the doctor there, who were all kind of like attendees to the resident guru there, and there on the wall was this little framed picture, a certificate rather, from the Guinness Book of World Records for the world record in treating the most people with partial and full leprosy in the world. It was like in the hundreds of thousands, right?
Wow.
But that's what they'd done, and like that was, and I love that. I love that story that they were going to go. We went off to be this kind of like incredibly full on sect, and then this branch came out of it. Well, actually, we're going to be even more full on that. We're going to give everything we have to help the most vulnerable people in society who nobody will touch, which I thought was tremendous.
That's fascinating. I wonder how they felt about being tended by agoris as well, because normal Indians tend to be quite freaked out by agoris.
Totally. I mean, but these were very kind of, they weren't what you would conceive as your regular agori. There were no skulls.
Coming back to that question of what made me do it. I was at Kumbh Mela 2001. I went out there to help out with the documentary film crew, and he wasn't a Gori, but he was a Naga Baba, and he had put his arm up in the air. You can't see it because of my funky background, but he put his arm up in the air. And I think it was 24 years ago, because I met a guy who'd studied him 24 years ago, and he'd actually written a book about these kind of guys. He was Danish. Yeah. Anyway, so this guy had this mortified hand and these long nails growing down, and people had to do a whole lot of stuff for him. And this guy was knocking back the chillums. And I remember one morning when I was there, the police had decided that they weren't going to let the press film anymore. Halfway through, not having invited all the press to this event, the cameraman I was there with, a guy called Steve, he was filming in the morning. And it was a particular morning when the sun, it was kind of at sunrise, and it was a special day because there was an eclipse, and it was also there was an eclipse. I think it was also a solstice or something like that. There was another astronomical event going on, and this guy got into a fight with the cops over his camera, and he had diarrhea, and he had white trousers on, and he basically crapped himself in front of probably 10,000 Indians. This big, tall white guy in white trousers, and then he had to go and sort himself out. So I was left on my own with a camera by the river, basically, and I remember going to go and what shall I do? Well, I'll go and see my friend, the Ek Bahu Baba, I think his name was. And as I arrived, he gave me a chillum. I give this man Kali chillum. Kali chillum. I've been up all night. Was in a state, and I remember just completely whiting in the lap of a naked sadhu next to me.
But I had one in Lucknow. I was traveling around looking at all the various different sites, and the chap who was taking me around the place, he was asking me, what are you doing in India? And I just come from Varanasi, so I was telling him a bit about the Agori, and I was actually doing some stories for a local, like a Lucknow city paper. They were running some of my work while I was staying with them, and he was like, "Oh, that's interesting. I know kind of a sadhu who does some yogic practices." And I'm like, "Well, what does he do?" And he kind of explains that he would take the stick and then kind of wrap his penis around the stick, tuck it between his legs, back between his legs, so it's quite tight and pulled back, and then would proceed to do squats. And he's like, "Do you want to go? Would that be of interest?" I'm like, tremendous interest. Let's go and see the penis squat guy. And but the real reason he really wanted to take me was that they would always kind of smoke loads of chillums, so kind of rock up there in a moped, and the sadhu was like, I'm not up for it today. It's not going to be any yogic displays today, but we will smoke some chillums, and kind of passing the chillum around. I'm genuinely baffled Like I'm like completely naive with this, and accidentally spilled the chillum out, right? And
Great.
it's just, yeah, totally. There's just this like audible, like, oh, the whole group, the whole room of people, and I spilled the chillum, and they're like, oh, gee, and like I can only imagine what they were just like, take it off him, Jesus Christ, like, and skip me on the subsequent rounds. But I do have a lovely photograph of just the chillum kind of illuminating one of the guys' faces, and also the sadhu passing me the chillum, but in this complete blue haze of charas smoke. It's wonderful. But
So you
I
didn't get to see the austerities?
didn't get to see the austerities. Didn't. Well, actually, I did get to see a very scratched phone screen photograph on a phone of some of the how the cities were obtained. But yeah, fair play. But they were that's one of the things I loved. I deeply, deeply loved about India, and I have such affection for it, or affection for that time. We were chatting before about like when you go back to a place, it's often you're thinking about going back to that time you were there, and it's obviously everything's changed. You've changed, the country's changed, and all that kind of stuff. But it was a wonderful thing of like just you never knew which way the day would take you, like and that's something I crave and I miss a lot.
I'd like to think that there's still sadhus doing strange things with their dicks in India even today.
We can only hope. We can only hope. So as we're in the Christmas in the Christmas time of year, and before while we were prepping for the show, you mentioned, I mean, you've got an area of work, body of work you've talked about, kind of like drugs in the Bible, and where they may be represented. But you also mentioned you've got some thoughts on the three kings. So could you take us through some of those?
Yeah, Three Kings are really interesting. I know Al Cummings has got a good line on the Three Kings. He's fascinated with them. And for one thing, they weren't kings. In the Bible, they're magi, wise men from the East. It's quite interesting how that kind of, let's say, power of wisdom has been transferred to the power of the king, because that's not what it was at all. But over history, we've now got them as the Three Kings. The Three Kings they bring three things to the baby Jesus. And we're talking about gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Obviously, I can never talk about this without thinking about the Monty Python sketch. Like, myrrh? What's myrrh? And so what is myrrh? Myrrh is, among other things, a fantastic painkiller. It's offered to Christ on his crucifixion. The reason and he declines it actually, perhaps because he wanted to keep his head clear to meet his father. Who knows? But so the reason it's a painkiller is it works on the opioid system, like opium, for example, and heroin and those kind of things. It works on the mu and delta opioid receptors, and it's also euphorogenic. It's lovely. I mean, myrrh is just an absolutely fantastic thing to eat. Calmative, and you find it in other parts of the Bible as well. You find it in Proverbs, for example. There's this wonderful line: "I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until morning." So you've got very clear reference to the aphrodisiac powers of myrrh as well, which I would recommend to anyone who's interested. So from a kind of pharmacological perspective, it's a tranquilizer, it's anti-anxiety, and it's good antidepressant as well. We don't really think about that when we think about myrrh. In the Western tradition, the Christian tradition, it got very much associated with death because of that whole story. But in the Eastern tradition, it's a medicine for all kinds of things, not just for making death a little bit less painful. There's actually a Zoroastrian story of a certain type of divination that was done with I believe young baby kings, and they would put three things in front of the king, and guess what they were? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And the baby that chose the gold would become a king with temporal power in this world. The king that chose the frankincense, or the baby that chose the frankincense, would become a religious or a spiritual king. and the baby that chose the myrrh would become a healer and a true son of Zoroaster. Okay. So this tradition goes back to the Zoroastrian tradition. Frankincense is a fascinating one. Frankincense works in a couple of different ways, and so when we think about frankincense, what do you think? Like, we know it as a smell, right? With the Christmas vibe to it. This stuff was brought 1,500 miles across a 6-month camel trek from Oman and across robber-infested deserts. This was one of the oldest traded commodities. This was before it was traded to Palestine. It was traded to Egypt, going way back. And in fact, there was a pharaoh of Egypt who tried to bring trees of frankincense over to Egypt to try and grow them there. So the story goes. Now, I believe it's got something like a 6,000-year history of trade, something like that, which is it's a lot of effort to go to for something that smells quite nice. And that's because it does a whole lot more than smells nice. And you can try this out yourself. So frankincense, pharmacologically speaking, it's tranquilizer. I don't really like that word tranquilizer because frankincense, it may make you tranquil, but it also does a whole lot of other things. And actually, when we talk about things like anxiolytic or hypnotic or all these kind of terms, we should bear in mind that these terms come from the poorhouses and the mental wards of our own culture, and that's not what they call them in their cultures. Right? Myrrh, for example, is called nataf in Hebrew, which means prophecy, and it also means distilled. It also means drip, which is quite interesting because it drips. So in terms of its pharmacology, it's complicated. It's got dehydroabiatic acid in it, which is as a GABA receptor agonist. It works on the same system as Valium, although it works, it's a whole lot more fun than Valium. And the GABA receptor is the most common receptor in your brain. About 40% of your neurons have GABA receptors on them. And it's an inhibitory system, the GABA system. So what that basically means is it calms the brain down. And that's very, very simplistically putting it, because it's a complex organ, obviously. And sometimes when you inhibit one neuron, it makes other neurons fire more. So there's certain parts of the brain which it makes fire more, and certain systems with it which it calms down. The feeling of it is pleasant and somewhat calming, but it doesn't make you super high. But what it does do rather reliably is open up a channel for divinatory information. And by that I mean you can use it in the following way. Like, for example, what I like to do is just burn a whole load of it in the bathroom. So you make a hot box, and that's something we might want to come on to later. But briefly now, the tabernacle in the Bible is designed very, very much like a hot box. It's perfectly sealed. It's a small chamber in the Holy of Holies in the back of the tabernacle tent. And what goes on in there is prophecy. The high priest would go in with a whole load of different resins in incense after already being basted with oil, which is also psychoactive, and or rather, having oil wiped all over him. We can get onto that in a little bit anyway. But anyway, these things are for very specifically for prophecy. And so if you go into hang out in your bath with a whole load of frankincense in the air, and if you want to smoke something beforehand, then go for it. But I would wager that it's very, very easy to get flashes of inspiration, images, coherent images that might be indicative of something that might be useful to you. Because we tend to think of psychoactives as something that we do for fun these days, and there's no reason why you shouldn't do them for fun. Well, there might be some reason if you shouldn't do them for fun, but there's no general reason why you shouldn't do them for fun. But back in the day, these were used for very specific reasons, and that was to look after the needs of the tribe. So that's what divination is about. So going in there, getting information, coming back and bringing it back. I forgot to mention one of the other interesting parts of frankincense, which is incensyl acetate, and that works on the TRPV3 ion channels. Things can get really, really complex. I don't know how far into the neurobiology we want to go, but that has together they have effects of, one of the major effects is to increase dopamine.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that frankincense does is it increases the amount of dopamine in the synaptic cleft. So basically, when one neuron comes in, you have a synapse, and then you have another neuron going out, and the message travels down the neuron into the synapse and then across. So if you've got more dopamine in that particular synaptic cleft, and it's a dopaminergic neuron, then it will be more likely to fire on the other side. So you can get more activity going on, whilst you've also got this inhibitory function. And then I guess the other thing which is really interesting about frankincense and about these resins and herbs generally is that they work in synergy in really complex, really fascinating ways at the level of the synapse. So yeah, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, they mean quite a lot, and these are things that were brought a long way and imported into, became seminal, and they go right back into the Old Testament as well. Frankincense, myrrh, and spikenard, and cinnamon, and all kinds of exciting stuff. That's all really in my second book. That's all in my second book, Neuro-Apocalypse. There's a bunch of articles online about the pharmacology of those.
That's awesome. Thank you, Danny. Really, really intriguing. I'll have to chat to you about that, actually, and another point. I've got some offline questions.
I've got some good material. I'll help you
out. Nice one. Wow. And in terms, because that's really a whole different array of a whole different area of kind of drugs in the Bible that I really hadn't even considered, but particularly kind of like the idea of the tabernacle being almost a device to amplify the effects of the various different substances. That's really interesting, and gives it that whole practice a whole different view and origin than I'd ever conceived before.
Yeah, the tabernacle. At that point in history, pipes hadn't been introduced into the Middle East, and the way people got high, or the way people used smokes, was by. And there's an account from Herodotus. He goes and visits the Scythians in about 500-600 BC, and he says that they fold the flaps of their tent down and they throw cannabis on the stones, and all the Scythes, they jump up and dance, and they're hotboxing the tent. This idea of hotboxing tents, you get it the Oracle at Delphi as well. Burning all kinds of interesting things in the cave. You get Chinese sages in their cells burning all kinds of stuff. So in the tabernacle, to cut a long story short, and it is a long story in the Bible, it's 5 chapters, 5.5 chapters, I believe, go into the construction of the tabernacle, which is a lot. The Bible's quite a concise book, tends to get through stories pretty quickly. But this, it's how far apart the pegs are, and how many skins go over the top, and the size of the chamber, and immaculate detail on all these things. And to cut a long story short, the back of the tabernacle is a 4.5 meter cubed chamber, and it has 4 skins over the top. It's got a thick veil all the way down to the ground to seal in whatever's inside. And the only thing that's inside is the high priest, the magic box, the Ark of the Covenant, and a censer, and handfuls of finely ground incense full of psychoactives. I mean, pretty much everything inside them is psychoactive. And the guy would burn this incense and create a smoke cloud which would stay in this hot box, and then he would talk to angels and see visions, and then he would bring that information back out to the tribe. And you see this in the stories of Exodus. A lot of it is about like war divination, for example. When do we attack? When do we go? I don't know. Moses goes off into the tabernacle and does his thing, and how he comes with some information. And that's very, very traditional shamanism. That's how ayahuasca was used in the jungle. One of the main things it was used for was war divination. When are the enemy going to attack, or should we ambush them? That kind of thing. Healing illnesses as well. You get that in the Bible after these divinatory trips into the tabernacle. What else? Finding resources that you need. That's another one. You see that a lot. There's some tribes which do nothing with ayahuasca except make pacts with game, make pacts with the lord of a particular animal that they want to eat, and the spirit of that will direct the shaman to where he's going to find that animal, and they go hunting and they find it. And you get something very similar in the Bible. You have the story of the Moses striking his rod against the rock. That's information that comes out of the tabernacle. So where can you find a well? Walking around with your rod trying to find underground water. We've got that in all kinds of traditions called well witching, or it's called what do they call it in Ireland?
Water dowsers.
Water dowsers. Yeah, so that's another one that comes out of it. So and that's just the second stage. So you have the first stage is when the priests, they all go in together into the tabernacle, and they're covered with an oil, and the oil contains 4 ingredients. It contains myrrh, it contains cinnamon, it contains cassia, and it contains cannabis. And I could literally talk about this for the next 3 hours, but just to put it very briefly, the combination of cinnamon and cassia inhibit 99% of the enzymes which break down drugs in your body. Right. So in the same way that ayahuasca, one of the ways ayahuasca works, and I don't want to get too reductivist, or is that the right word? I don't want to be too kind of I think reductionist, probably the right word about this, but the beta carbolines, harmine, etc., that are in the vine, they inhibit your monoamine oxidase enzymes, which means that the DMT in the leaf doesn't get broken down in your gut, which means it can get to your brain and it can do fantastic things in your brain. You have something very similar in this tradition, which goes back to the Bible. The mixture of cinnamon and cassia works on a different enzyme system, it's a cytochrome system, but it knocks out all those defenses. And then you've also got myrrh, and then you've also got cannabis in that mix. And you can look at Chris Bennett's research, is really good on cannabis in the Bible. And then the high priest, all the priests would do that. Some of the priests would then go off and eat showbread. We don't know what that was, but we do know that it was effective in the size of an olive, and then later in the size of the bean. And there's a wonderful line from the Talmud, and it says, later these things were cursed, and it was only the priests were only given the size of the amount the size of a bean, and some of them refused it, and some of them were voracious and consumed. And there's a story of one priest who took his share and took another priest's share as well, and he was called robber from that day until his death, which is the kind of thing you can imagine happening at Glastonbury or something. Someone shuffling down someone else's dose and then being called greedy for the rest of their life. So the high priest would be anointed with this oil, have his enzymes shut down basically, and then go into a room with, what's in it? I'll just give you a rundown of what's in it. It's got onycha, which is probably labdanum, which works on the GABA receptor agonist. Frankincense, which we've already talked about. Agar wood, which works on everything. Agar wood is oud, which is amazing smelling stuff. Aphrodisiac, euphoric, hypnotic, sedative, antidepressant. That one works on all the systems: acetylcholine, GABA, serotonin, norepinephrine, reuptake inhibitor. And you've got spikenard, which is the one that there's a kind of scene in the New Testament where Jesus gets very cross because there's some ointments bought, and Judas gets cross. He says, why are we spending all this money on ointment? And Christ has that famous line. He says, when we could give it to the poor. And Christ says, yeah, but we're always going to have the poor, but you're not always going to have me. And so that's spikenard, which is a really interesting one. That's a nootropic. It improves your learning, improves your memory when you take that one.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And yeah, which is quite important. So imagine going into this, you're doing divination, and there's a lot of THC involved, there's a lot of cannabis involved, and that messes with your short-term memory. So if you've got something which increases your power to remember stuff, and you're getting this information from the spirits, or from however you want to believe it, from somewhere deep in your head or wherever it might be, then you want to remember it. And that one helps. And then galbanum, which is another one, that one boosts dopamine and serotonin. Saffron, which is lovely, the yellow stuff that people put in rice, but they really should put it in their pipe and smoke it, because it's gorgeous stuff. In Islamic jurisprudence, saffron is one of the drugs that gives joy.
Wonderful.
It was allowed. It was a permissible drug.
I think that's a lovely place for us to wrap up.
Yeah, I reckon.
Yeah. Danny, for those who are intrigued by your wonderful, wonderful time you've spent with us. Where's the best place for them to find you?
Well, you can look at my website, which is nemusend.co.uk. I apologise in advance for it. It's in an absolute state. I'm incredibly busy with rain and a tiny team of very stretched, single mums and stuff like that. So I've got a lot of work to do, basically. So that site is somewhat, it hasn't got a whole lot of new stuff on it. But check that out. You can look at Cypress, psychedelicpress.co.uk, or is it cypress.co.uk? I always forget, but look up Psychedelic Press. You can find both my books there. That's Science Revealed, which is about the history of science and revelation in it, and Neuro-Apocalypse, which is about linguistics and psychedelics, and I'm looking at autism and other brain conditions, and how different things that happen to your brain can change the way that you perceive and change the way that you respond and access, in some cases, superhuman powers. So you can look at all that. If you run a web search for Danny Nemu or Reverend Nemu, there's a whole load of articles and me going blah, 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 like I have been today. And what else? If you're interested in the NGO side of things, and I really hope you are, because it's a load of work and we're having some fantastic results, but we are really struggling with money at this point. We've got 78 grand to get together for this one project. So, some any of your coins would be fantastic. So that's rainumbrella.org. And then the Trees of Music project is at treesofmusic.org. And we've got a fantastic video, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about. That's a collaboration between an Indigenous nation and 2 London orchestras, which has been made into a video, which we're going to be releasing in a few weeks with a very, very famous voiceover. I'm going to keep that to myself. But she played a witch in a very famous film. And if anyone is interested, if anyone is excited by the idea of a global networked intelligence, get in touch. You can find me on Twitter at Reverend Nemu, at Rev Nemu, sorry. I apologize in advance again for the flippant nonsense that I post on Twitter. But if anyone wants to get involved with RAIN, bring your skills. If you don't have money, bring your money and your skills if you like. But get involved. If you can edit videos, if you can plug numbers into a spreadsheet, let me know. And maybe we can do some stuff.
Awesome. And again, as we said earlier in the show, I really encourage you guys to do so. It's a fantastic charity. They do remarkable work. And it's the type of work that we need. Wonderful. Right, let's leave it there. Danny, it's been absolutely brilliant. Been a pleasure.
Likewise, thanks very much. I'll see you very shortly, I should imagine. And then listen, I'm really excited about the fact that you've got an allotment, because I haven't yet, and I don't want to starve.
I've got I started drying an absolute raft of uchi curry Japanese pumpkin seeds for you. We'll keep you in the game, Danny. We'll keep you in the game.
Thanks a lot, man. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you, Danny. That was fantastic. I hope you all enjoyed that. I really did. A huge spectrum of stuff we've covered there. Danny's a tremendous guest, and we'll be back again. We've got plenty of more subjects for us to go over. So Danny will be back with us again in the new year. To wrap up, just want to kind of say it again. RAIN are awesome. If you're going to do something for Christmas, think about supporting them. They're a really great charity, and every donation would be hugely appreciated. Before we wrap up, I just want to say happy Christmas, happy holidays, happy Saturnalia, happy Yule, happy whatever you celebrate. And I hope you all have a peaceful time and get to spend some lovely time with those who you love and care about around you. I'm Darren Mason. Thanks for listening to The Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon. Bye.